During our engagement dinner, my father-in-law humiliated me by calling me a gold digger, and my fiancé just laughed at me, so I made them regret it forever. I'm a public school teacher, and I've always been proud of that. Not because the pay is great, it isn't, but because I genuinely believe in what I do. When I met him at a coffee shop near the university 2 years ago, he seemed to admire that about me. He was finishing his MBA, talking about wanting to make a difference in the world, and I thought we shared the same values. I should have known better when he suggested we meet his parents at Chez Laurent, the kind of restaurant where a single appetizer costs more than I spend on groceries in a week. I spent my entire weekend's tip money from my part-time waitressing job on a dress that would fit in. The black wrap dress wasn't designer, but it was elegant enough, I hoped. His parents arrived fashionably late, his father in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his mother dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light. They greeted me with the kind of polite smiles that never reached the eyes, the ones I'd learned to recognize from parent-teacher conferences with entitled families. Dinner started pleasantly enough. His mother asked about my work, though I noticed how her smile tightened when I mentioned teaching at Roosevelt Elementary, one of the district's Title I schools. His father remained mostly silent, studying me like I was a specimen under a microscope. The conversation flowed around topics I could barely contribute to: their recent trip to the Hamptons, renovations on their vacation home in Aspen, mutual friends I'd never heard of. I tried to engage, sharing a story about my students' science fair, but I could see I was losing their attention. When the dessert course arrived, a $70 chocolate soufflé, his father finally spoke directly to me. "So, dear, tell me honestly, what exactly do you see in our son?" The question caught me off guard. I started to answer about his kindness, his intelligence, how he made me laugh, but his father cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Let me rephrase that. What do you really see in him? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks pretty convenient for you. A struggling teacher landing a wealthy husband? Some might call that lucky. Others might call it calculating." The word hung in the air like a slap. Calculating. The implication was crystal clear, but I couldn't quite believe he'd said it so directly. My face burned with humiliation as other diners began to glance our way. "Dad?" my fiancé said, but his voice was weak, uncertain. "Oh, come now. Son, let's call a spade a spade. She's pretty enough, I'll give her that. But what else does she bring to the table? A teacher's salary? Student loans? A family that can't even afford to contribute to the wedding?" Each word was a calculated strike. He'd clearly done his research, knew exactly how to wound me. My hands trembled as I set down my fork, the soufflé untouched. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady. "I never asked for anything from your family. I pay my own bills, and I was planning to pay for half our wedding." His father laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. How noble! And what exactly would half a wedding be from someone making $35,000 a year? A pizza party in a school gymnasium? That's when I looked at my fiancé, expecting him to finally speak up, to defend me, to show some backbone. Instead, he was staring at his plate, his face red with embarrassment, not for me, but for the scene I was supposedly causing. And then he laughed, a nervous, uncomfortable chuckle that somehow hurt worse than his father's cruelty. He was choosing their approval over my dignity, and he didn't even have the courage to do it intentionally. I reached for my engagement ring with steady hands. The 2-carat diamond that had once symbolized our future together now felt like a shackle. I slipped it off my finger and placed it gently next to the untouched soufflé. "Thank you for dinner," I said, standing gracefully, "and thank you for showing me exactly who you all are." I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving behind not just the ring, but the illusion that I'd found someone worthy of sharing my life with. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely light, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. I was still in yesterday's black dress, having collapsed on my couch the moment I got home. My small apartment felt different somehow, not smaller or shabbier, but more mine. I was making coffee when the knocking started, loud, insistent, desperate. I knew it was him before I looked through the peephole. He stood there with an enormous bouquet of white roses and that kicked puppy expression he wore whenever he'd disappointed someone. "Please," he said when I opened the door. "Can we talk?" I let him in, mostly because I didn't want my neighbors witnessing whatever this was about to become. He thrust the flowers at me like they were some kind of peace offering, and I noticed his hands were shaking. "These are beautiful," I said, setting them on my kitchen counter without looking for a vase, "but they don't change anything." My father was completely out of line, he began, pacing around my tiny living room like a caged animal. He had no right to say those things. He doesn't understand us, doesn't understand what we have. I watched him pace, noting how he couldn't meet my eyes. What do we have exactly? Love, he said, finally looking at me. We love each other. That's what matters, right? Not what my father thinks, not what anyone thinks. If that's true, then where were you last night? Where was that love when your father was humiliating me? His face crumpled. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. I've never seen him act like that before. Haven't you? I asked quietly. Because I have. I've seen the way he looks at me, the way he dismisses anything I say. I've seen how you defer to him on everything, where we go to dinner, what we talk about, even what we watch on TV when they visit. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you disagreed with your father about anything? When was the last time you chose what you wanted over what would make him proud? He stopped pacing, and for a moment, I thought I might have gotten through to him. But then he pulled out the ring box, and my heart sank. Look, I talked to him this morning. He feels terrible. He wants to take us both to dinner next week to apologize. He'll pay for the whole wedding. Anything you want. We can have it at the country club. Invite all your friends from school. The country club. Where his family were members and mine would be guests. Where every detail would be chosen to impress his father's friends rather than celebrate our love. You still don't get it, I said, sinking onto my couch. This isn't about money or wedding venues. It's about respect. It's about you standing up for the person you supposedly want to spend your life with. I do want that, he said, sitting beside me and trying to take my hand. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Please just put the ring back on. We'll figure this out. Will we? Or will you just find new ways to smooth things over, to make everyone comfortable except me? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something. Finally, he spoke, his voice small and defeated. He controls everything. The trust fund, my job at his company, even this apartment. It's all his. If I defy him completely, I lose everything I've worked for. And there it was. The truth I'd been trying not to see for 2 years. He wasn't choosing between me and his father. He was choosing between me and his comfortable life. And I already knew which one mattered more. I understand, I said softly. I do. But I can't marry someone who sees our relationship as something to be managed rather than defended. He tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to make me understand the pressure he was under. But I'd heard enough. When he finally left, he took the ring with him, and I felt that strange lightness again. The calls started 3 days later. My phone would ring at all hours, during my lunch break, while I was grading papers, even at 6 in the morning. Each time his name would flash on the screen, and each time I'd let it go to voicemail. The messages grew increasingly desperate. First, they were apologies mixed with pleas for me to reconsider. Then came promises about standing up to his father, about choosing me over family expectations. By the 4th day, there was anger creeping into his voice, frustration that I wasn't being reasonable about the situation. But it was the message from his mother that really caught my attention. Her voice was syrup sweet, the kind of tone she probably used with difficult board members at her charity functions. Sweetheart, I hope you're not letting pride get in the way of your future. My husband can be traditional in his thinking, but he means well. You're a smart girl. Surely you can see that some battles aren't worth fighting. We all have to make compromises in relationships. Call me compromises. As if accepting humiliation was just part of being a mature adult. I was still processing that when my principal called me into her office Friday afternoon. Mrs. Davidson was in her 60s, a former teacher herself who'd fought her way up through the ranks when women administrators were still a rarity. She had a reputation for being fair, but tough, and I respected her immensely. Sit down, she said, closing the door behind me. I got an interesting phone call this morning. My stomach dropped. Oh? A gentleman claiming to be concerned about your emotional stability. He suggested that you'd been under significant stress lately and might not be fit to be around children. The blood drained from my face. What did you tell him? I told him that any concerns about my teacher's performance would need to be submitted in writing, through official channels with specific examples of problematic behavior. Funny thing is, he couldn't provide any. Mrs. Davidson leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Want to tell me what this is really about? I found myself telling her everything. The dinner, the humiliation, the breakup, and now this apparent attempt to sabotage my career. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. That's harassment, she said when I finished. And it's incredibly stupid harassment at that. I've been watching you teach for 3 years. Your students adore you. Your test scores are excellent, and you've never had a single behavioral incident. If anything, you're one of our most stable teachers." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by anger. It was one thing to attack me personally, but to go after my livelihood, my ability to support myself, that was a new low. "What should I do?" I asked. "Nothing for now. But if he calls again, I'll be forwarding his information to our legal department. We don't take kindly to outside interference with our staff." Walking home that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. His father's attempt to punish me had backfired, but it had also confirmed something I'd been trying not to acknowledge. This family would never accept me. And worse, they'd actively work to destroy me if I didn't fall in line. That evening, I finally listened to the voicemails from my ex-fiancé. In the most recent one, his voice was strained, exhausted. "I don't know what else to do. My father says you're being dramatic, that this whole thing is blown out of proportion. Maybe if you just apologized for walking out, we could move past this. Call me back, please." Apologized. For having enough self-respect to leave when I was being insulted. For refusing to accept unacceptable behavior. I deleted all the messages without returning the call. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. My roommate found me that weekend sitting on our living room floor, surrounded by bridal magazines I'd been collecting for months. I was methodically tearing out pages, venue photos, dress designs, flower arrangements, and dropping them into a large trash bag. "Therapeutic destruction?" she asked, settling down beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "Something like that," I said, ripping out a particularly lavish spread of wedding cakes. "I can't believe I wasted so much money on these stupid magazines." She picked up one of the torn pages, a photo of a bride in an elaborate ball gown. "You know what we should do? Burn them." I looked up at her, surprised. "What?" "Seriously. My grandmother used to say that fire cleanses everything. We could have a little ceremony, say goodbye to this version of your future, and make space for whatever comes next." An hour later, we were on our apartment building's roof, feeding magazine pages to the flames in our portable fire pit. It was oddly satisfying, watching those perfect wedding images curl and blacken, releasing me from dreams that had never really been mine anyway. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we watched the last of the magazines burn. "Did you ever actually want that wedding? All those country club receptions and fancy flowers?" I considered the question seriously. I thought I did. But looking back, I think I just wanted to want it. It seemed like what I was supposed to dream about. And what do you actually want? I don't know yet. Maybe that's the problem. I've been so focused on fitting into someone else's vision of my life that I forgot to figure out my own. The conversation reminded me of something I'd been avoiding, calling my sister. She lived 3 states away, had met my ex-fiancé exactly twice, but had an uncanny ability to see through people's facades. "Finally," she said when she answered the phone. "I was wondering when you'd call to tell me you dumped that spineless mama's boy. How did you—" "Instagram. You haven't posted a single photo with him in 2 weeks, and you usually post them together every few days. Plus, you sound different. Lighter." I told her about the dinner, about his father's cruelty, and his failure to defend me. She listened quietly, making small noises of disgust at the appropriate moments. "I have to be honest," she said when I finished. "I never liked him. I kept waiting for you to see what I saw." "Which was what?" "A man who'd never learned to stand up to his father. Do you remember that first Christmas when you brought him home? Dad made some joke about his fancy car, and instead of laughing it off, he launched into this whole explanation about how it was a graduation gift, how he'd worked hard to earn it, like he needed our approval to justify having nice things." I did remember that. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet that he cared about my family's opinion. And then there was the way he always deferred to you about everything. What restaurant, what movie, what to do on weekends. I thought it was considerate at first, but then I realized he wasn't being considerate. He was avoiding making decisions that might displease someone. "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened?" She was right. I probably would have defended him, explained away the behavior, made excuses. "The thing is," my sister continued, "you don't need someone who agrees with everything you say. You need someone who has your back when it matters, who'll stand with you even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, really looking at it for the first time in months. The books on my shelves, chosen because I loved them, not because they'd impress anyone. The photos on my walls, memories of trips I'd taken and friends I'd made. The little succulent garden on my windowsill that I'd started because I enjoyed taking care of something green and growing. This was my life. Small, maybe, by some people's standards, but entirely mine. And for the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough. 2 weeks of blissful silence ended when I opened my laptop after school and saw his name in my inbox. The subject line read, "We need to discuss this rationally." I should have deleted it without reading it. Instead, I clicked it open and immediately wished I hadn't. "I've given you time to cool off and think about this situation more clearly. I understand you were upset about dinner with my parents, but your reaction was completely disproportionate to what actually happened. My father was simply being protective of his family, which is natural for any parent in his position. Your dramatic exit embarrassed everyone involved and created unnecessary conflict. I've been trying to smooth things over with my family while also giving you space to calm down, but I'm starting to think you're enjoying the attention this whole situation has created. I've spoken with several people about this, and they all agree that you're being unreasonable. Relationships require compromise, and sometimes that means accepting that not everyone will express themselves the way you'd prefer. My father comes from a different generation, with different communication styles. I think we should take a break until you're ready to be more mature about this situation. I'm willing to work through this, but only if you can approach it like an adult instead of throwing tantrums when things don't go exactly your way. My parents have offered to pay for couples counseling if you think that would help you process your feelings more constructively. They genuinely want to move forward and build a relationship with you, but that requires effort from both sides. Let me know when you're ready to have a rational conversation about our future." I read it 3 times, my disbelief growing with each pass. He'd managed to rewrite history completely, casting himself as the patient, reasonable partner dealing with my emotional instability. His father's deliberate cruelty had become a different communication style. My self-respect had become a tantrum. But it was the phrase, "I've spoken with several people about this," that really got to me. He'd been discussing our private situation with others, probably seeking validation for his version of events. I wondered if he'd mentioned his father's attempt to sabotage my career, or if that detail had been conveniently omitted from his narrative. The most infuriating part was his assumption that I'd eventually come crawling back, properly chastened and ready to apologize for the crime of having boundaries. The email read like a parent scolding a difficult child, not a man addressing someone he claimed to love. I started typing a response several times. First, a point-by-point rebuttal of his revisionist history. Then, a detailed explanation of why his father's behavior was unacceptable, and his failure to defend me was relationship ending. Finally, I considered a simple, "go to hell," and calling it done. In the end, I closed the laptop without responding at all. My roommate found me in the kitchen an hour later, aggressively chopping vegetables for dinner with more force than necessary. "Bad day?" she asked, noting the pile of perfectly minced onions. "Email from he who shall not be named. Apparently, I'm dramatic and immature, and I should be grateful his father was just being protective." "Oh, honey," she said, taking the knife away from me before I injured myself. "Please tell me you're not actually considering responding to that garbage." "I'm not. But I want to. I want to explain exactly why he's wrong, why his father's behavior was unacceptable, why his entire family operates like some kind of toxic monarchy where everyone has to bow down to the patriarch. But you won't, because you're smarter than that." She was right. Engaging with his email would only give him what he wanted: my attention, my emotional energy, and evidence that I was still invested enough in his opinion to argue with him. "Besides," she continued, pulling out ingredients for pasta, "people like that don't argue in good faith. You could write the most eloquent, rational response in the world, and he'd just find new ways to dismiss it. The only way to win that game is not to play." That night, I deleted the email without saving it. If he was waiting for a response, he'd be waiting indefinitely. Some conversations aren't worth having, especially with people who've already decided you're wrong before you've even spoken. I almost didn't recognize her voice when she called. His mother had never contacted me directly before. All previous interactions had been filtered through her son, carefully orchestrated family gatherings where conversation stayed safely in shallow waters. "I was wondering if you might have time for coffee," she said, her usual commanding tone replaced by something softer, more uncertain. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Every instinct told me to decline. This had to be another manipulation, another attempt to bring me back into the fold on their terms. But curiosity won out, and I found myself agreeing to meet her at a small cafe downtown, far from their usual haunts. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a simple white mug. No designer handbag on the table, no ostentatious jewelry. She looked almost ordinary, like any other middle-aged woman grabbing coffee on a Saturday afternoon. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted, ordering a latte from the waitress. What did you want to discuss? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if it held answers to questions she hadn't learned how to ask yet. I owe you an apology, she said finally. For that dinner, for my husband's behavior, and for my own silence while it happened. I hadn't expected that. Okay. I've been thinking about it for weeks, replaying that evening in my mind. The look on your face when he called you calculating, I'll never forget it. It reminded me of something I'd buried for a very long time. She looked up at me then, and I was startled to see genuine pain in her eyes. 32 years ago, I was you. Different circumstances, but the same essential situation. I was a nurse from a middle-class family, engaged to a man whose father thought I was beneath their social status. What happened? I stayed. I accepted the humiliation, convinced myself it was just one bad evening, that love would conquer all the class differences and family disapproval. I married him anyway. She paused, taking a shaky sip of her coffee. My father-in-law made my life hell for the first 5 years of my marriage. Nothing I did was good enough. Not my cooking, not my hosting, not my contributions to family conversations. He criticized everything from my accent to my table manners to my choice of friends. And your husband? Did he defend you? Her laugh was bitter. He did what my son did to you. He smoothed things over, made excuses, asked me to be more understanding. He said his father was just set in his ways, that it would get better with time. Did it? Eventually, yes, but not because his father changed, because I did. I learned to dress the way they wanted, speak the way they wanted, think the way they wanted. I gave up nursing because it wasn't prestigious enough. I gave up my friends because they weren't the right sort. I gave up pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left of the woman my husband had fallen in love with. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was the future I'd escaped, the life I would have lived if I'd stayed and tried to make it work. When I saw you stand up and leave that restaurant, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Envy. Pure, devastating envy for your courage to walk away from something that was destroying you. She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. My son is a good man, but he's weak in the same way his father was weak. He'll choose the path of least resistance every time, even if it means sacrificing the people he claims to love. And my husband? He's gotten worse over the years, more controlling, more convinced that his way is the only acceptable way. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that leaving was the right choice, and because I hope that seeing you do it might give me the courage to remember who I used to be, before I let them reshape me into their idea of the perfect wife. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two women from different generations who'd faced the same impossible choice. She'd chosen security and acceptance, and I'd chosen dignity and uncertainty. I hope you find your way back to yourself, I said as we prepared to leave. I hope you never lose yourself in the first place, she replied. You're stronger than I ever was. Walking home, I felt an unexpected sadness for the woman she'd been, and the woman she might have remained if she'd made different choices. But I also felt a deep gratitude for her honesty, for showing me exactly what my future would have looked like if I'd stayed and tried to fit into their world. A month later, I was knee-deep in packing boxes, when I heard the familiar knock on my door. I'd found a small house with a garden across town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and it felt like a fresh start. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not him. He looked different when I opened the door. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy I hadn't seen before. In his hand was a crumpled piece of paper that he clutched like a lifeline. Can I come in? Please. I have something to show you. Against my better judgment, I let him inside. He looked around at the half-packed boxes, the apartment that was slowly being stripped of my presence. You're really leaving, he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice, as if he'd expected me to stay frozen in place until he decided to come back. I found a house, I said simply. Small, but it has a garden. I've always wanted to grow my own tomatoes. He smiled at that, a genuine smile I remembered from our early days together. You mentioned that on our third date. You said you wanted to can your own pasta sauce someday. The fact that he remembered surprised me. What did you want to show me? He handed me the crumpled paper with shaking hands. It was a letter, written in his father's distinctive handwriting, though the tone was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him. You ungrateful little shit. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Walking away from the family business to chase some foolish notion of independence? And for what? For that gold-digging teacher who couldn't even pretend to be grateful for our generosity? I've spent 30 years building this company, building our reputation, and you're willing to throw it all away for someone who will never be good enough for our family. If you think I'll welcome you back when this juvenile rebellion runs its course, you're mistaken. I looked up at him, shocked. He wrote this? 2 days ago, when I told him I'd accepted a position with Morrison Tech downtown. It's a startup. Nothing glamorous, but it's mine. My decisions, my work, my successes and failures. You left the family business? He nodded, running his hands through his hair. It took me weeks to work up the courage. I kept thinking about what you said, about never choosing what I wanted over what would make him proud. You were right. I've spent my whole life seeking his approval, and it was killing me. It was killing us. I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but recognition. This was the man I'd thought I was marrying, before his family's dynamics had obscured him. I've been seeing a therapist, he continued, trying to understand why I let him control so much of my life, why I couldn't stand up for you when it mattered. She says I have something called enmeshment issues with my family. That's a start, I said carefully. But therapy doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change the fact that when I needed you most, you weren't there. I know, and I know I probably don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Not to go back to how things were, I don't want that either. But maybe we could try again, as the people we actually are, instead of the people they expected us to be. I looked at him standing in my half-empty living room, holding evidence of his father's fury, having finally chosen his own path despite the cost. A part of me was proud of him, genuinely proud of the courage it must have taken to walk away from everything he'd known. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not the same person who left that restaurant a month ago. I've learned things about myself, about what I want and don't want in a relationship. I can't go back to being the accommodating girlfriend who smooths over family conflicts. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if you'd be willing to explore who we might be if we started over, with honesty this time instead of trying to fit into anyone else's expectations. I sat down on my couch, the letter still in my hands. I need time, and I need to know that this isn't just rebellion against your father that will fade when the novelty wears off. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be at my new job, figuring out who I am when no one's telling me who to be. And maybe, if you decide you're willing to try again, we can figure out who we are together. After he left, I sat surrounded by boxes, holding his father's cruel letter. For the first time since that awful dinner, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared to feel. The possibility that the man I'd fallen in love with might still exist underneath all those years of family conditioning. The small velvet box appeared on my new doorstep 3 days after I'd moved into the house. No note, no explanation, just my name written in elegant script on the attached card. Inside was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. Not large or flashy, but undeniably precious. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, set in white gold that had the patina of age. It was clearly vintage, clearly valuable, and clearly not from him. My phone rang as I was still staring at it. Do you like it? His mother's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. It's beautiful, but I can't accept this. It's too much. It belonged to my grandmother, she said. She left it to me when I was about your age, newly married, and trying to find my place in a family that didn't understand me. I sank onto my new couch, the ring box still open in my lap. Why are you giving it to me? Because my husband always hated it. Said it wasn't impressive enough, not flashy enough to represent our family's status. He wanted me to have it reset with a larger stone, something that would make more of a statement at social events. But you didn't. No. It was the only thing I kept that was truly mine, a connection to the woman I'd been before I married into their world. I've worn it exactly 3 times in 32 years, always when my husband wasn't around to disapprove. I could hear her voice catching slightly, and I realized this conversation was as emotional for her as it was unexpected for me. I want you to have it because you did what I never could. You walked away when staying would have cost you yourself. And because, she paused, struggling with the words, because I've started painting again. Painting? I was an art student when I met my husband. I gave it up after we married. He said it was a hobby, not serious enough for someone in our position. But watching you choose yourself over security made me remember who I used to be. I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me. I've enrolled in classes at the community college, she continued. Nothing dramatic, just watercolors twice a week. But it feels like coming back to life. What does your husband think? He doesn't know yet. I'm not ready for that battle. But having something that's entirely mine again, it's terrifying and wonderful. After we hung up, I sat in my new living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and holding my hand up to catch the light through the sapphire. It wasn't an engagement ring or a promise of forever. It was something better. It was a reminder that sometimes the most valuable gifts come from unexpected sources, and that solidarity between women can bridge even the widest gaps. I spent the rest of the afternoon arranging furniture and hanging pictures, making decisions based entirely on what I liked, rather than what would impress visitors or fit someone else's aesthetic. The house was small, but every corner felt like me. The reading nook by the window where morning light would be perfect for grading papers. The kitchen with enough counter space for serious cooking experiments. The back door that opened onto a yard where I could finally plant that garden. When evening came, I stood on my back porch wearing the sapphire ring and looking out at the space that would soon hold tomatoes and herbs and whatever else I decided to grow. For the first time in years, my future felt entirely my own, full of possibilities I got to choose. 3 months into what we cautiously called trying again, I learned that rebuilding trust is like growing a garden. It requires patience, consistent care, and the acceptance that some things might not take root no matter how much you want them to. We met twice a week for coffee, never at my house, never at his apartment. Neutral territory felt safer somehow, as if the weight of our history might crush these tentative new conversations before they had a chance to grow into something real. He told me about his new job, how strange it felt to make decisions without checking with his father first, how the other developers respected his ideas simply because they were good ideas, not because of his family name. I told him about my garden, how satisfying it was to watch things grow from seeds I'd planted with my own hands. The sessions with the couples therapist were harder. Dr. Martinez had a way of asking questions that stripped away all the careful politeness we'd developed, forcing us to examine the infected wounds we'd been trying to ignore. "Tell me about trust," she said during our 6th session. "What does it mean to each of you, and where do you think it broke down?" "I need to know that when someone attacks me, he'll defend me," I said, looking directly at him. "Not smooth things over afterward, not make excuses for why it happened, but stand up in the moment when it matters. And I need to know that she won't give up on us the moment things get difficult," he replied. "That she'll give me a chance to do better instead of just walking away." But walking away wasn't giving up, Dr. Martinez observed. It was self-preservation. Can you see the difference? That session ended with both of us in tears, finally acknowledging that my leaving hadn't been abandonment, it had been survival. His father, predictably, had not taken his defection well. The calls started friendly enough, offers to discuss this misunderstanding, invitations to family dinners where they could work things out. When those failed, the tone shifted to anger, then disappointment, then calculated cruelty designed to make him question his choices. "He's cutting me out of the will," he told me one afternoon, stirring his coffee absently. "Made a point of having his lawyer call to inform me officially. How do you feel about that?" Relieved, mostly. Guilty about feeling relieved, but relieved nonetheless. I spent so many years living according to what would protect that inheritance, making choices based on what he wanted, rather than what I wanted. "Do you regret it? Giving up the security?" He considered the question seriously. "I regret how long it took me to realize that security bought with your soul isn't security at all. It's just a comfortable prison." But even as we worked through these revelations together, I could feel something fundamental had shifted between us. The easy intimacy we'd once shared felt forced now, like we were both trying to recapture something that had been irreparably damaged. During our physical moments, the careful kisses, the tentative hand-holding, I found myself analyzing his responses rather than feeling them. When he laughed at my jokes, I wondered if he was performing happiness. When he agreed with my opinions, I questioned whether it was genuine or just conflict avoidance. "I don't trust my own judgment anymore," I confessed to my roommate one evening. "I can't tell if I'm being unfairly suspicious or if my instincts are trying to protect me from making the same mistake twice." "Maybe both," she said gently. "Maybe you need more time. Or maybe some things just can't be unbroken." The realization hit me gradually, like watching a plant slowly wither despite all your careful attention. We could have meaningful conversations, work through our issues in therapy, even build a friendship based on mutual respect and understanding. But the deep, instinctive trust that makes love feel safe, that was gone, and no amount of effort seemed capable of bringing it back. I found myself holding back, keeping parts of myself in reserve, always maintaining an escape route, and he seemed to sense it, trying harder and harder to prove his reliability, which only made everything feel more performative and less genuine. The sapphire ring on my finger had become a daily reminder that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is acknowledge when something beautiful has reached its end. I cooked dinner for him on a Tuesday evening in late September, the first time he'd been to my house since I'd moved in. I made his favorite pasta dish, the one I'd learned from his Italian grandmother's recipe during happier times, and set the table with the good dishes I'd bought for myself, not for entertaining others. We ate quietly, making small talk about work and the weather, both of us sensing that something significant was happening without being quite ready to name it. He complimented the meal, helped clear the dishes, and settled onto my couch as if we were any ordinary couple spending a pleasant evening together. But we weren't ordinary, and we weren't really a couple anymore, despite our best efforts to pretend otherwise. "This isn't working," I said finally, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't try to argue or convince me I was wrong. He just nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging with what looked like relief mixed with sadness. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for weeks, but I didn't want to admit it. We're trying so hard to rebuild something that we're both exhausted. And what we're building, it doesn't feel like us anymore. It feels like a performance of what we think a healthy relationship should look like." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. "I love you. I need you to know that. What I felt for you was real. What I still feel is real. I know. I love you too. But love isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes love means recognizing when you've broken something beyond repair." We sat in silence for a long time, both of us crying quietly for the future we'd planned and the people we'd been when we'd believed in it. There was no anger now, no blame or recrimination, just the deep sadness of two people acknowledging a painful truth. "I think I needed to lose you to learn how to stand up for myself," he said eventually. "And maybe you needed to leave to learn that you're strong enough to choose yourself over security. We became different people through this. Better people maybe, but not people who fit together anymore." "I keep thinking about parallel lines," he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "They're perfectly straight, perfectly themselves, but they never intersect. They can run alongside each other forever, but they never actually meet." It was a beautiful metaphor and painfully accurate. We'd both grown and changed, but we'd grown in directions that led away from each other, rather than toward a common future. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we say goodbye properly, with dignity and kindness and respect for what we shared. We don't try to stay friends right away. We need space to grieve this and move forward. But maybe someday we can look back on this and be grateful for what we taught each other." He nodded, standing slowly and gathering his jacket. At the door, he turned back to me, and for a moment he looked like the young man I'd met in that coffee shop 2 years ago, full of potential and dreams. "Thank you," he said, "for leaving when you did, for giving me a chance to try again, and for being brave enough to end this when we both knew it was over. Thank you for learning to stand up to your father. That took real courage." We hugged goodbye, a real hug that acknowledged both what we'd lost and what we'd gained. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the life I'd built for myself, the books, the plants, the furniture I'd chosen because I loved it, not because it impressed anyone. The sadness was real and deep, but underneath it was something else, peace. The peace that comes from making the hard choice with grace, from ending something with honesty, instead of letting it limp along until it died of neglect. I touched the sapphire ring on my finger and thought about his mother, about the courage it takes to start over at any age. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own house, make decisions based on my own values, and continue building a life that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I was hanging Christmas lights on my front porch when I realized I'd stopped thinking about him every day. The house had become fully mine now, filled with the scents of cinnamon and fresh pine, the walls decorated with my students' artwork and photos from weekend trips I'd taken alone. The promotion had come as a surprise. When Mrs. Davidson called me into her office in October, I'd expected another routine check-in, not an offer to become the school's new curriculum coordinator. The position came with a significant salary increase and the chance to influence educational policy across the district. "You've shown remarkable resilience this year," she'd said, signing the paperwork that would change my financial situation dramatically. "And your innovative teaching methods have caught the attention of the State Education Board. We need someone with your vision and backbone in leadership." I'd used the money I'd saved for wedding expenses as a down payment on the house, but the promotion meant I could finally breathe financially. No more weekend waitressing shifts, no more choosing between groceries and gas. For the first time in my adult life, I had genuine economic security that belonged to me alone. The dating had started slowly. Coffee dates with the librarian from the downtown branch, dinner with my neighbor's brother who was visiting from Portland. Nothing serious, nothing that demanded commitment, just the gentle rediscovery of my own romantic preferences without the weight of anyone else's expectations. I'd learned that I actually enjoyed making decisions: where to eat, what movie to watch, how to spend Sunday afternoons. During my relationship, I'd deferred so often that I'd forgotten I had opinions about these things. My garden had exceeded every expectation. The tomatoes had produced enough fruit for me to can sauce and give jars to neighbors. The herb garden provided fresh basil and rosemary for cooking experiments that sometimes succeeded brilliantly and sometimes failed spectacularly, but were always entirely my choice. The friendship with his mother had developed into something genuine and surprising. She'd invited me to her first art show in 30 years, a small exhibition at the community center featuring her watercolor landscapes. I'd watched her beam with pride as strangers admired her work, finally receiving recognition for talents that had been dismissed for decades. "I filed for separation last month," she'd told me over coffee after the show. "It's terrifying and liberating and long overdue. How are you managing?" "Better than I expected. I have my grandmother's jewelry, some savings I'd kept separate, and a small inheritance from my aunt that I never touched. It's not luxury, but it's enough to start over." Seeing her courage had made my own choices feel less dramatic and more like simple self-respect. I ran into him at the coffee shop where we'd first met, both of us reaching for the same holiday blend at the same moment. The recognition was instant but not painful, more like encountering an old friend from a different chapter of your life. "You look happy," he said, and meant it. "You look different," I replied, noting the confident way he carried himself, the genuine smile that reached his eyes. We talked for 20 minutes about safe subjects: work, the unusually mild winter, his mother's art show. He'd been promoted at the startup, was dating someone new, had bought a small condo downtown. His father had eventually stopped calling, accepting the permanence of their estrangement with typical stubborn pride. "I'm glad we tried again," he said as we prepared to leave, "even though it didn't work out. It helped me understand the difference between loving someone and being compatible with them. And now you know you can choose yourself even when it's difficult. Thanks to you." Walking home, I felt a warm satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication or being proven right. We'd both grown into people who could handle adult conversations about complex emotions without drama or blame. We'd learned to respect what we'd shared without trying to recreate it. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and the latest novel from my book club. My cat curled in my lap, Christmas music playing softly in the background. The sapphire ring caught the light from my reading lamp, no longer a symbol of anything except my own journey toward becoming someone who valued herself appropriately. This was what contentment felt like, not the breathless excitement of new romance or the validation of someone else's approval, but the steady satisfaction of a life built on choices that honored who I actually was. Spring arrived early that year, and I spent my Saturday morning in the garden, planting tomato seedlings I'd started from seeds on my kitchen windowsill. The sapphire ring caught the morning light as I worked, no longer a gift from someone else's mother, but simply a beautiful piece of jewelry that I wore because I loved it. A year and a half had passed since that awful dinner, and I could finally think about it without the sharp sting of humiliation. It had become simply a story about the night I learned who I was and what I would and wouldn't accept. The headlines in the local business section had surprised me 6 months ago. His father's company facing federal investigation for tax evasion and fraudulent practices. The man who'd called me a gold digger was apparently the one who'd been stealing from investors, employees, and the government. His son had dodged a bullet by leaving when he did, though I doubted he'd seen it that way at the time. His mother had finalized her divorce and moved into a small apartment near the art district downtown. Her paintings were selling well enough to support her modest lifestyle, and she'd started teaching watercolor classes to other women starting over later in life. She'd found her tribe, her purpose, and her voice. My ex-fiancé was engaged again, to a woman he'd met at his startup who came from a background similar to his own. The announcement in the society pages showed them both smiling genuinely, and I felt nothing but happiness for them. They looked like they fit together in a way he and I never had, even at our best. I was dating someone new myself, a fellow teacher who coached soccer and made me laugh until my sides hurt. He'd never met his father's approval because his father had died when he was 12, and he'd learned early that the only person's opinion that mattered in his life choices was his own. We were taking things slowly, building friendship first, but there was an ease between us that felt healthy and sustainable. Sitting back on my heels, Surrounded by the neat rows of vegetables I'd planted, I thought about fairy tales and happy endings. As a child, I'd believed that finding the right prince was the only path to happiness, that love conquered all obstacles if you just tried hard enough. But real life had taught me something more valuable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the happy ending is learning to rescue yourself. Sometimes the greatest romance is the one you build with your own life, creating something beautiful and meaningful that belongs entirely to you. The house around me hummed with the sounds of a life fully lived. The dishwasher running, my cat purring on the windowsill, music drifting from the radio in the kitchen. This was my castle, built not on someone else's foundation, but on the solid ground of my own choices and values. I no longer kept the sapphire ring as a reminder of strength I needed to find. I wore it because I'd become that strength. The shy teacher who'd been intimidated by wealthy in-laws had evolved into a woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. That evening, I called my sister to tell her about the garden, about the promotion I'd received to assistant principal, about the vacation I was planning to Ireland this summer. She listened with the satisfaction of someone who'd always known I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. "Remember when you called me that night after the dinner?" she said. "You were so upset, convinced you'd made a mistake by walking away." "I remember. I knew then that you'd be fine. Not because walking away was easy, but because you finally chose yourself over comfort. That's when I knew you'd figured out the secret." "What secret?" "That you don't need anyone's permission to live your own life." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I'd planned a lazy morning with coffee and the newspaper, maybe some baking if the mood struck me, definitely some time in the garden checking on the progress of the seeds I'd planted. These were small pleasures, ordinary moments that might seem unremarkable to someone looking for dramatic transformation. But they represented something revolutionary to me, the radical act of building a life based on what brought me joy, rather than what impressed others. The fairy tale I'd written for myself didn't end with a wedding or a rescue or someone else completing me. It ended with the recognition that I'd been complete all along, just waiting for the courage to stop trying to fit into someone else's story and start writing my own. And they all lived authentically ever after.